Hill Ocean. Oh yeah, and we are going to be recording this. Again, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Capitol Hill Oceans Week's first breakout session of the day, titled Building Resilience with Community-Led Ocean Science and Conservation. My name is Melvin Alvarez, and I'm a grant program associate at 11th Hour Racing, where I have the privilege to work with the amazing scientists, technologists, and community leaders that are part of today's panel. A few housekeeping rules before we get started. First, this session is being recorded and it will be posted online in case you would like to share it with others. Second, our entities have purchased and often use the Worldly Language on Demand app. So if you are non-English speaker or hearing impaired, you can check the chat box and use the Worldly app link for translations of this session. And lastly, if you have any questions for our panelists today, please put those into the chat box and we'll get to as many of those as possible. Again, welcome. This session will highlight grantees supported by Eric and Wendy Schmidt philanthropic programs, including Schmidt Ocean Institute, which works to advance the frontiers of global maritime research and technology development at sea. Schmidt Marine Technology Partners, which supports the development of new ocean technologies that solve complex ocean health issues. And 11th Hour Racing, which works to advance solution and best practices in coastal communities and the maritime industry. On behalf of these three entities, we are so happy to be able to support CHOW this year and its focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion. This is an issue that is very important to each of our entities and our collaborators. In this panel, you will hear from Boston University professor, Dr. Randy Rojan, who is the co-chief scientist of the Phoenix Islands Protected Areas Conservation Trust, working with Native communities in the Central Pacific Island nation of Kiribati. You will also hear from Marauder Robotics Chief Executive Officer, Dr. Dennis Yancey, and his tech approach to restore kelp forests in California. And Mr. Martin Brass, who is Director of Community Affairs and Field Research at Vieques Conservation and Historical Trust, working to restore one of Puerto Rico's economic and cultural gems. These three talented panelists have a unique approach to their work that is always centering the need and perspective of the local community to guide their work. And rather than providing more details about the amazing panelists, let's just hear directly from them. To start, each panelist will have a few minutes to share an overview of their work, and then we will have a questions and answer session. So with that, I'll pass it over to Dr. Randy Rojan, who is joining us live from Schmidt Ocean Institute research vessel Falcor, which is currently traveling from Honolulu to the Phoenix Islands archipelago, including Kiribati. Dr. Rojan?
Thank you so much for hosting this panel, for having me. Thank you to the Schmidt Ocean Institute for allowing us to have this incredible expedition on board Falcor. It's lovely to be here and virtually with you. We are indeed sailing at this moment. Yesterday, we were at a seamount in areas beyond national jurisdiction, so high seas seamounts. And now we're on our way to the Phoenix archipelago, which hopefully you can see on your screen, is these two protected areas that sort of are on either side of the equator. So north will be in US waters in Howland and Baker, which is part of the Pacific Remote Islands Marine National Monuments. And south of the equator will be in the Phoenix Islands Protected Area, which is in the Republic of Kiribati. I'm an American, but I have been working with the Phoenix Islands Protected Area and with Kiribati for about 14 years now. And of course, we've now started to work both sides of this equator, and part of the spirit of international cooperation and partnership, thinking about these two essentially next door neighbor marine protected areas. But one thing I really want to talk to you about today and share with you today is a few things that I've just seen over the past 14 years and a little bit of history and context for that. So the Phoenix Islands is one of the first large scale marine protected areas. There was the Great Barrier Reef Marine Park in Australia, and then Papahanaumokuakea in the US, and the Phoenix Islands both came online at around the same time, between 2006 and 2008, from concept to inception. The Phoenix Islands is now the largest and deepest UNESCO World Heritage Site. And from this, beginnings of large-scale marine conservation. There's been this catalytic cascade of many new protected areas throughout the Pacific and throughout the globe. But the Phoenix Islands protected area was really the first one put forward by a least developed country. And 14 years in, and on the eve of trying to protect so much more conservation and sort of try to create 30% of the oceans protected by 2030, I think it's really important to reflect on some of the lessons that we've learned and thinking about what's worked in some of these protected areas in developed countries, in developing countries, in places that have nearshore marine protected areas and places that are far offshore. And one thing I'd really like to talk about is how important it is to work in the true spirit of international collaboration. You know, every country has, and every group, of course, has resources and culture and flavor and interests and a dimension, a deeper dimension to bring to every project. And part of what's been really special about the Phoenix Islands protected area and working with the United States back and forth is that we've been able to bring resources and be able to create a science program that basically on very little funding, just because we were able to work collaboratively and work with the country, not just for the country and not just for science and ourselves. And that piece of working together and working with everyone, I think, is the key to sustainability of a project. Everything's vulnerable. Nothing lasts forever. Everything that's been made can be unmade. And to have a project with long-standing longevity, I think, really requires a constant back and forth and a commitment to both, I want to say both, I'll say to all partners at the table. And that's something that I think we've always inherently known, but I think is worth overtly stating here as we launch the new decade of ocean science. And as we start really thinking about how to protect 30% of our oceans, we can't do it country by country by country alone. The spirit of international cooperation and partnership has to be at the heart and soul of everything that we do. And it has to be at the absolute epicenter of how we work, not just for this generation, but towards the next one. And so we have been working with kids, trying to work with everybody together to explore waters within Kiribati, within the United States, to bring technology and to share technology and insights and findings, to work within multiple cultures, and to make sure that in everything that we do it together. So even here on Falcor, right now at 5 a.m., whatever time it is at this exact moment, we have an Kiribati undergraduate student on board who experienced her first deep sea dive yesterday. We have many, many countries represented in this expedition, either on the crew or on the science team. And even here, we're working in both US waters and, in the MPA next door, far away. And the messaging that we do from this cruise will be something that it's not just a 1 month, we're on ship right now, this is our week, this is our moment. It's something that we'll be trying to share for the next decade at least. And I can say this from experience, having done this for a decade or more. Every piece of information, all of the science helps to motivate conservation and inspire everybody and every partner to continue working together in this spirit of collaboration. So with that, I guess I'll just close these opening remarks with the age-old but oldie but goodie from Jacques Cousteau, who really noticed that people protect what they love, and they love what they know. And I think that's really what we're doing here as scientists. We're trying to know for the sake of knowing, but we're also trying to know for the sake of telling and for the sake of sharing. And it's that sharing piece in that spirit of internet, I think, is absolutely the key to the success and the resilience of marine protected areas.
Whoa, that well said. Thank you, Randy. I really like the photos that went along with your description. I really brought everything to life, and especially like when you talk about the local community. Next up, we have Marauder Robotics Chief Executive Officer, Dr. Dennis Yancey, with his tech approach to manage coastal ecosystem. Take it away, Dennis.
Hi, everyone. My name is Dennis Yancey. I'm the CEO of Marauder Robotics. We're building a workhorse underwater vehicle platform that leverages computer vision and technology in order to identify objects and engage those objects. We're initially focusing on actions performed by divers. We aspire, hopefully at the end of this 5 minutes, you'll see how we aspire to be the John Deere of the sea. Next slide. Here, our first application is kelp forest restoration. As you see on the left, you see an urchin barren. This is a non-productive state of kelp reefs that we're seeing more and more around the world. Here, you have an overabundance of urchins, and the reason they graze everything, all vegetation, so it's devoid of vegetation. The reason that we have this state is that we consume the predators that can keep their populations in check. And we keep their populations in check. So the reason why this should matter to you is that this is every other breath that we take comes from the ocean, and much of the protein that we consume comes from ecosystems like this. And it's only going to get worse and worse with growing populations and climate change. So what organizations like the Bay Foundation are doing, they're using their current state of the art, where they use divers. And the divers go down with hammers, and they reduce these urchin population to less than 2 per square meter. And what they've shown is that they can restore these kelp reefs, like what you see healthy reef on the right. The problem with this is that divers are not scalable. They're not meant to work on the seafloor for long periods of time and at deep depths. So this is where Marauder Robotics come in. Next slide. What we're doing is automating the task of divers. We're using technology such as computer vision in order to identify urchins, and then using machine learning in order to navigate to the urchins and engage the urchins or harvest them. By using technology, it'll accelerate the restoration timeline and reduce the cost by several orders of magnitude. Next slide. When you layer on top of that the software that we're building, where you can send images to a marine manager, they can review those images and data, and then they can make real-time decisions on how to deploy resources. And one of the resources that they can use are the smart devices that are deployed in the ocean on the left. And they can send actionable commands to our device. So now you have a human in the loop until the algorithm is validated by the marine managers. This will allow the marine managers to increase their productivity over time and to be able to manage larger resources in areas in the ocean using these smart ocean devices. Other applications, next slide, are port services, fishery management. So what are the fish stocks, seafood fish stocks that are on the seafloor as well as in the water column? We can also use this particular platform to manage invasive species like lionfish and European green crabs. Another market that we're looking at are also aquaculture services. So using robots to seed long lines, to harvest long lines, to monitor health of these aquacultures. Thank you.
Thank you, Dennis. It's certainly a fascinating approach that you take with technology and redefining what it means to be a natural resources manager. And you also a very like relaxed presence. I feel like I often need that, and I'm really glad that you're part of this panel. The third member of our panel today is Mr. Mark Martin Brad, who is Director of Community Affairs and Field Research at Vieques Conservation and Historical Trust, working to restore the bioluminescent bay in Vieques while also serving as a community resilience on the island. Mark?
Good afternoon for me. morning for some of you. Thank you very much. And thank you, Melvin, for having 11th Hour Racing and the 11th Ocean Foundation helping us with this. I am Mark Martin Brass, as he says, and I come from a very small nonprofit organization that's been around for 35 years, based on the island of Vieques. And I can show you that in the next slide. And that's Puerto Rico, obviously in the Caribbean. That little dot you see to the right is Vieques Island. You might know it because at one point it was a military base. It has some very large wildlife refuge, and it has gone through a series of changes in its histories that are very varied, both socially and ecologically. We have an organization that main mission is to protect the natural and cultural resources, most importantly a bioluminescent bay, but we have had to stretch that mission to include modern conditions of climate change, obviously Hurricane Maria, who destroyed our island in 2017, dealing with the reality that some of our rural status and some of our isolation, both in the world of water, but also in the world of underserved, has limited our resources and made all the community leaders, all the community organizations step it up and stretch a little bit into this changing world. Because it's a fantastic island that has many natural wonders. One of the most important ones, I think, to us and to the world is in the next slide. And that is the bioluminescent bay of Puerto Mosquito, brightest bioluminescent bay on Earth, an incredible ecosystem with so many parts that are moving, their mangroves, seagrasses, the biodiversity, the weather, all these conditions that make it an ideal place for this one single cell dinoflagellate Pyrodinium bahamense to thrive and have a peak bloom that maintains throughout the years. Absolutely incredible. You could see one of our citizen science students out there in a sampling trip, and you can see how it looks. The capturing it goes a lot with what the doctor said earlier, Rojan. It's like this place is so incredible. It has the ability to capture not only the minds and the visuals, but also the hearts of people. And those places get less and less, and we get confused by technology that you think you can see this in a documentary, but you really have to be there. This place provides an excellent situation for nature-based solutions, which is a little bit of what we're doing. Climate change impacts as a sentinel ecosystem, and the socioeconomic benefits that is a driver of this place. Also, it's a very culturally iconic place for Vieques and for Puerto Rico. And in terms of the amount of area the coral reefs cover, the seagrass beds cover, all these other ecosystems, because bioluminescent bays are incredibly rare. And a great model to study, plankton, to study the climate change conditions in such coastal areas. And that's a little bit of what we're doing there. And an ideal system to understand the human natural coupled ecosystem dynamics, since it's used for the socioeconomic benefit, but scientifically speaking, it's an incredible wonder. Connections like this and networking, like Dr. Rajan was saying, they have a World Heritage Site. We want this to be a World Heritage Site. So this type of collaboration like we're doing today, I think will result in moving forward in those ways. And networking is a big part of what we've done, and you'll see that in the next slide. When you see this complicated slide, it really goes down that we have become in the middle, the Vieques Conservation Trust, sort of a convener, a connector organization where we are able to take the needs and the resources and put them together. We know that there's a lot of academia and research community. We know there's weather stations, water quality stations, tons of data that sit in shelves. And we think that when work is being done, research is being done in a community, if you have not only involved the community, but build capacity, connect, continue the work, this community organization services and hubs makes the better research, more bang for your buck, better economic use of the research money, and it continues to grow. At the same time, you can build capacity, like you see in the top photo, for the citizen science and community programs. When you look to your left, it's the Island Strong Network. We have been into a lot of conferences, a lot of thinking about the government spending, the government funding, the government policy. If you have community organizations, it will work. If not, It's too top heavy. It will connect for a second. It will clash culturally, so it can't happen. So we're working on that mangrove project that you see on the bottom. And what we had was community foundations like 11th Hour Racing, Ocean Foundations, and others take our dream of taking an area that Maria destroyed and put in jeopardy the bioluminescent bay and its ecosystem functioning. And we have dreams, we have ideas. They brought not only the funding, but also the connection to technical resources in the research community that I never will have to be able to help us make that dream come true and make the reality of the project. Along the way, all these things get put together, again, using the community as a hub, and for that, community organizations are key. So I'm glad to participate in this and hope to even get the people out of this panel to work together. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Certainly, Vieques Conservation and Historical Trust is one of the 11th Hour Racing's favorite grantees. You didn't hear from me. And I'm really excited to hopefully go visit Vieques once we resume to somewhat more normal flying and visit schedules. Thank you for those remarks to Mark, Dr. Yancey, Dr. Rojan. It's really a really nice way to set us up and get us started. These powerful projects and examples are inspiring for a multitude of reasons, and it will be great to learn more about the impact and challenges that you have overcome. So with that, let's start off with a question for all panelists. Are you ready?
Yeah.
Awesome.
Born ready.
So what are some of the principles that guide you in the work that you do? And what voices and perspective have you brought into your work? And since Randy was born ready, like, let's just toss it over to you. But you have that cool background.
I think I touched on it before, but it really is my driving core principle is work collaboratively with people, not for people, not for one project that then you share with others. It's always from the ground, work with people. You know, I work in uninhabited marine protected areas in some of the most remote parts of the planet. And you know, working with people is actually a really hard thing to do when there are no people in the places that you're working. But working with the stakeholders who do care about those places, who govern those places, who have the potential to shape the future of those places, like for the sake of the plants and animals that live there, for the sake of protecting parts of our planet that benefit us all, and that, you know, we all have the potential to negatively impact if we're not careful. You know, that has to be something that's built, you know, into the DNA of any project, is doing something together. So for me, that is my number one guiding principle. It's harder to do in COVID sometimes. And it's, you know, because you can't fly face to face and do things together. And, you know, it's also hard when you're separated by just so many miles. But so I won't tell you that it's perfect. And I think one of the lessons and the challenges I've faced, you know, is trying to do that across such a distance, especially, you know, I'm a mother with young children, and these kinds of travels is hard. And you'd think COVID would make it easier, but you know, when you're working with countries that don't have regular internet access, that can also be a challenge. So I guess for me, the challenges I've faced have been trying to find operational ways to keep working together, but the core principle is to make it happen no matter what, and to still keep working together.
Thank you. Yeah, I can certainly relate to the challenges of trying to collaborate remotely. And I can only imagine how much more difficult it is once it's community more remote. Mark, or would you like to go next?
Sure. I think you know, part of the driving principle that we have been using is to help our community first and to unite. And so when I was talking about uniting the research with that, is that it has to be a little bit more than just leaving money behind. And as you do research, it has to be seeing what science you have available as researchers in academia and the people who are coming to it. That also helps the management of the place. That also helps what they need in terms of science, how they live their life. The cultural inclusion in science was separated for a very long time, and we realized that it didn't work. The reality is we're not winning the race of ocean conservation. And part of that was because scientists were considered to be simply elitist. and separate it for the community and sort of top down telling them what the community, this is what it is, and you don't know any better. And part of it is we didn't educate in to make it better, but we didn't include them. In the recent, we made a change, and we understand that that's some form more of an inclusion that we have. But sometimes you have to look at the community and see what their problems are, what their challenges are, so that you can start the science that way and take them where you want to be. These are not sites. These are not simply specimens that you can go in and tell them what, I want to do this, and I'll go out and I'll pay a hotel and maybe hire somebody, these are places you should invest. And I think that there should be an investment at the grant level in that community participation, because you can't expect simply scientists to do this. You need community hubs, you need a person to do it extra. They're not going to take Dr. Rogan and replicate that model all the time. And in terms of looking at the community that you're going to in a community and have a virtuous exchange between the community and the researchers. And for that, sometimes you have to give them what they want in order to give them what they need.
Well said, Mark. Dennis, can you top what these two just said?
I can't talk to what they said, primarily because I'm from the for-profit side, they're on the nonprofit side, so our perspectives are different. My co-founder and I, we started a for-profit company in this space. There are very few for-profit companies doing restoration, but we wanted to leave this world in a better place than what we had found it, and we wanted to use our engineering abilities to do that. That's what the resource that we had. The three things that we bring, three principles that we bring to our team and our culture at Marauder is perseverance is the first. One of the quotes that I like to reflect on often is the difference between the impossible and the possible lies in the person's determination, which was spoken by a baseball coach of all people, Tommy Lasorda. And it talks about perseverance, not giving up, just keep on doing it until you come to the end. I mean, this one perspective or perseverance got me through MIT, got me through Stanford. The second is belief in self. And then the third is the openness to others' opinions and ideas. That's the core culture that we have at Marauder, and that's what we bring every day to the office and to this space.
Wow. Thank you, Dennis. And thank you all for just being very open and sharing your perspective for your personal experience in this area. Mark and Randy, I want to expand on what you just said with the next question about, and wanted to ask you, can you provide some examples of community strength or resilience that you have seen while working on your projects, and try to narrow down a bit more on how you work with the communities and what the community resilience looks like in each of your projects. Mark, do you want to get started?
Sure. So in our projects, the bioluminescent bay, it was somewhat easy, not to bore everybody. You have one of the most incredible visuals in the world, and you have to do research with scientific equipment. So you take the students out there, you do the citizen science, you do the education programs. And whenever everybody came to visit, one of the things we did is we have no university, zero. In Vieques, in Puerto Rico, obviously we do. No Oceanographic Institute. We didn't have any lab on the island, zero. We had 3 biologists and 2 didn't do marine. And so what we had to do was build the capacity in the place to host these people. And when they came here, we took them to the community and connected them to them and kind of paid for the process a little bit through scholarships, to education levels, to trips and back and forth. To train the local people into actually be doing the science, at least at the field level. I'm a field researcher. Dr. Rojan outthings me by a lot, she has a lot more training and can, but I can serve her because she can't be everywhere. And if somebody wanted to do research on the island, we could connect it, we could bring people along that process. We also use what they use. They use social media. They use different models to teach themselves. So the idea of sitting them down in an industrial situation of rows and teaching them is not really as conducive to changing culture immediately. So we use the methods that they used and allowed them to guide us through that and giving them some ownership in the sense of it. We also had to adjust after Maria. We're a natural resource conservation, but when Maria hit, they needed us to move supplies, to host things, to give them water. So we changed our entire structure, became solar, became water catchment, started doing programs, and then we said, okay, we're stretching, but what we can definitely do is create a mangrove restoration program with the community to restore the bioluminescent bay and show that we can take action when climate change or when disaster happens.
That's
but
amazing.
Basically include them in the process.
That is certainly amazing. Randy, it sounds like you're ready to give us more examples.
Oh, no, I was just so inspired by what you said, Mark. You're right. And that you just showcased in your example how, you need both sides and how everybody can contribute. That was just a beautiful example of how, especially when there's resilience from a major storm event, right? How these partnerships can make everything stronger, which is just incredible. For us, I guess we have so many examples, and some big, some small over the years, but I think I'll highlight a project that we call Bring Pippa Home, Pippa being the Phoenix Islands protected area, right? The short acronym. And again, I mentioned that we were working, this project is inherently people free. There's 25 people who are 2-year caretaker residents in a protected area the size of California. So there's really not people there. Instead, the vast majority of the country lives over 1,000 miles away in one of 2 neighboring archipelagos. And so how do you work together? And the answer is really to take the time away from science and to bring science and bring benefit and bring opportunities and bring partnership to the country. So I spend a lot of time working in the fields and working in my lab, but I spend an equal amount of time really going back and forth to Tarawa and trying to, which is I don't even know how, I'm cheating time. I don't know how all this time happens, but I don't sleep. But, we go to Tarawa, which is the capital. And, sometimes we meet with government officials, and on the same trip, we'll meet with children. And on the same trip, we'll be meeting with community leaders and village elders in, grass miniabas, and sometimes we'll rent a boat. And even though sometimes we're talking about the deep sea, sometimes we'll just put on masks and snorkels and just go out and try to do some local field work together. And that's the opening to a conversation, to a 2-way conversation that finds out, what does a community want, or what do they think, or what do they need, or if they don't need anything, sometimes it's a cue to leave. But it's what it really is it's just a conversation about, here's who we are, here's what we can do together. Do you want it or not? And, how can we tailor this to make this project successful for the long term? And, exactly like you said, Mark, one of the things that we try to do is open up opportunities, not just in those short-term pieces, but we're always trying to find ways to train students, right, to bring I'm an academic, right, but to bring students with us, to try to get them credit towards their degree and to give them something really meaningful towards professional development that they can turn into a career opportunity that will have a lasting impact beyond the short-term interaction that each one sort of has, but to build a longer-term future for this project and for the partnerships.
Well, thank you both. I can tell you've been thinking about this for a while, so that's reassuring. Dennis, help me completely shift gears with the next question about diversity in marine tech. Dennis, can you share your experience as a leader in marine tech, and maybe elaborate a bit on how we grow diversity in ocean science and tech fields? And I'm going to cheat. I'm also going to throw these questions to Mark and Randy if you want to add after Dennis. How do we grow diversity in ocean science? Like, let's just think about that for a little bit. In mind you, we're running out of time.
Okay, so the second question, how do we grow diversity in ocean science and tech fields? It's very simple. It starts with the decision maker. They need to understand their biases, whether they're conscious and unconscious biases. And then they need to make deliberate decisions that may go against those biases. It's just as simple as that. Starts at the top and it's the culture at the top.
Thank you, Dennis. Randy, were you about to say something?
No, I was just about to agree. I think it's a good idea. To really think about the open just an open mindset and trying to address biases from the beginning. I'll add one more piece though, which is I think that the time scale of a lot of projects, right? The funding ephemerality of you have a 2-year project or a 1-year project or a 3-year project doesn't always lend itself to the challenges of diversity. I spoke before about education, and I think one of the best ways that we can bring diversity into ocean sciences and into building longevity for these projects and for these partnerships is in enabling long form education, right? Workshops are awesome, but they are short term and they accomplish a very specific goal. But I'm often asked to teach people to replicate what we do, and that can't be done in a workshop, right? That has to be done over multiple degrees and over multiple years and over lots of in situ training and back and forth. And finding the funding support for that is really hard, because that level of support often goes beyond the time scale of most projects. So I'll say fund international scholarships and educational opportunities, and think about timelines about how to support projects that might go beyond the scope of a simple science project. If we're really trying to get diversity into the mix for the long term, we have to think about a larger timescale.
Mark, in a minute or so, can you
Sure, I'll try, and I'll try to include some of what Karen and David were asking there. I mean, I think one of them is the perspective. You have to allow a perspective that breaks some of those cultural walls, and one of the ways to do it is by having experiences, and those experiences, more than workshops, can definitely change some lives. When all of us traveled for the first time, we definitely learned in a different way. And then traveling is hard with COVID, but let's think longer term. That is one of those exchanges that we have with students traveling back, and students coming to Vieques have proven. We have students that come, and then the students can talk to each other, and the message goes a lot quicker when it's coming from one of their peers, and having that exchange. So by bringing the diversity into the table of the experiences, you're definitely doing a lot. To bring diversity, you have to bring culture. And answering what some of the persons were asking is like, you have to kind of start looking at funding, scientific design, and logistics that include cultural, not only considerations, but participation. And we're not talking about a talk. We're talking about actual capacity building that will also leave behind somebody that have ownership and give longevity to the results and long-term monitoring of the project, even if you have no more funding in the future. And that I think it's a good way to build a cultural conservation and diversity.
Well, thank you. And Mark, extra thanks, because you just set me up for the question that I wanted to answer, the question from the audience that I wanted to ask. So we're going to shift gears, because we're getting close to the top of the hour, and answer some question from the audience. The question that Mark kind of already answered is from Kevin Bryan, who said, what specific changes or differences can we expect to see when communities and cultures are included in the scientific process? And how can we spread this concept through data gathering efforts around the world? Do the remaining panelists want to contribute to that?
My sister always says, all technology is always in the service of an objective. And how you define that objective, is important. And the way you define that objective is by including people from the communities that you want to impact from the very beginning, before you actually build technology. You include them in every aspect of the development. So that's how you define the objective, that technology is going to serve.
You know, I think we've built time into the projects to respect the cultural practices of every place that we work. So, you know, even with resources like Falcor, which is, you know, a deep sea ship and, you know, is a really expensive operation to run. When we work in Kiribati and when we land in the Phoenix Islands for the 25 people that live there, we dedicate a day to showing them the ship, to going on island and celebrating the fact that we're together in whatever cultural practice they like, including, you know, I'll never forget the moment I first stepped on the ship and had to tell an entire scientific group and an entire crew that they needed to practice music and bring some storytelling to the table, because we were going to spend a day on a really important scientific, you know, expedition away from that, because that's the right way to work, right? That's the way this culture and this partnership works, is to share music and to break bread and to have a feast together to celebrate the science. And there have been countless examples of lots of times and lots of places where you open what you're doing and you open up your mind and you open up your time to working with whatever community practices or whatever people really want to do. And that's how you really sort of start at a place of common ground. And so for me, I think it's just about making the time to do that, whatever that is.
Throw a
Absolutely.
sentence in. I want to clear up that not, you know, by doing community research, it's not that you hand them the design of the research. You cannot do that, because you'll wind up with something that doesn't work. But it's by that, creating the space where you even have to be there as a principal investigator and say, no, that won't work, because that's not the way the scientific process works, etc. And that's why we think it specifically is an inclusion of this cultural variable into the person who's going to work it in the grant, or even better, the person who's going to help you on the community.
Can I add to what Mark said?
Dennis,
you know,
I'm sorry,
yes.
but we're really running out of time. So, and I really want to ask this other question. Apologize. And the question comes from David Riera, who asks, how can you build sustainable bridges for students and recent graduates to partner and learn alongside each of you or your efforts literally in like 30 seconds or less? Dr. Rojan, you want to take this on first?
30 seconds or less. I guess I'll just say, keep in touch, right? We meet a lot of people and everybody meets a lot of people, and, you know, just building, you know, not being scared to reach out and continue those partnerships and continue those friendships and continue the conversation beyond a single interaction. Sometimes it's hard, right? Everyone gets busy and overwhelmed, but persistence often wins. And so I think that, every conversation is a beginning, but doesn't have to be an end.
Mm-hmm. Dennis, do you want to give some advice to young professionals?
Yeah, just continue to reach out to us. Express your what you want to work on, what you desire. Also, come with new ideas, because we don't know everything. I mean, there are knowledge gaps. We have blind spots. You know, if you see something, come and approach us and start talking about that. Start talking about your solutions. Our solutions aren't the only one.
Mark, you got 30 seconds.
30 seconds, very quickly, what they both said. And the fact that their students who are just graduated are perfect for people like us, who, if you can find, you know, we have bad experience and good experience, but if you can find what the community needs that they can do, that's a really good virtuous exchange if you plan it well. And I certainly say, bring them.
Thank you. And I appreciate the rush answers. Believe it or not, we are at the top of the hour and we need to conclude this session. Everyone, please join me in thanking this amazing panelist.
Thank you. It was so nice to meet you all.
Certainly, thank you all. And for folks in the Zoom universe, if you're interested in learning more about this great panelist or the Schmidt philanthropic programs and resources, we're going to drop some links in the chat. Again, thank you all for joining us today. And this was a really great conversation. I'm really glad and grateful